The information contained in this video is intended for educational purposes. We are not responsible for any damage to your device resulting from improper disassembly or installation. Proceed at your own risk. Hey, this is Mike from GoCellPhoneRepair.com, and today we're going to replace the screen on an LG G3. This is a relatively straightforward project with a completion time of about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your skill level and experience. We'll start by making sure that the phone is powered off, and from here we'll flip it over and remove the battery cover. There's a small divot down towards the bottom end here that makes it pretty easy to pry open, unlike the G2. And once you do that, we want to remove the battery and make sure that the micro SD and the SIM card have been removed from the phone. The SIM card's a little bit tricky to get out. I actually had to fool with it for a little bit to get it started, and I eventually ended up using a pick. So if you're very careful, you can take a somewhat sharp object and just gently slide it out down towards the inside of the battery case here. And once we do that, we're going to remove all of the screws from the two rear housings. There's one at the bottom and one at the top, so you got a bunch of them going around the perimeter here, and then two in the center. The one next to the camera here is actually a slightly different size, so you don't want to mix that up with the others. It's actually a little bit shorter, so we'll just go ahead and get these out real quick here. And once we make sure that we have all the screws removed from the rear housings, you can take a small pry tool, and I found a soft spot down here at the bottom corner that I was able to get under, and you just want to work your way around. You see the bottom one comes off pretty easily, and that actually makes it a little bit easier here to get underneath this part. You can kind of pull it up with your finger and then just real gently work your way around. There are several clips here that you'll encounter, so you want to make sure you don't force anything and crack this housing. They tend to break pretty easily if you put too much stress on them, but just take your time, work your way around. Comes off pretty easily. And we'll go ahead and set that aside for now. First thing I like to do is make sure that the display that I ordered is going to be functioning properly. So what we're going to do is take the new part and plug it into the bottom before we go ahead and remove the old screen. So you'll have two connectors over here on the right hand side. We're going to have to just plug those in and set the battery inside. Again, I like to just make sure that the LCD and the digitizer are fully functional. So we'll just disconnect these two pieces down here at the bottom, and you have to make sure that they are out of your way when you put the battery inside. So you'll see here in a minute when I go to plug the battery in. And these things, it's a little tricky to work with this, especially in this position. So don't force these connectors. Make sure you take your time. If you line them up straight, it should be very easy to connect them. You shouldn't have to apply much pressure. And that can cause some problems if you push down too hard when you're not lined up straight. And once we've got those plugged in, we can kind of put the display over here to the side. And I'm going to install the battery again. Make sure that you move the existing cables out of the way, because obviously it's going to be really tough to plug that in to get the battery connected if you've got those underneath it. So you can just kind of pull them straight up, set that inside. And as you know, the power button on this phone is on the back panel. So we're going to go ahead and take this back panel and just set it back into position long enough so that we can power up the phone. And once it turns on, make sure the LCD looks good, digitizer is fully functional, and then we can proceed from there. We've got two other cables here, one for each camera. I would recommend disconnecting the main camera. You don't necessarily have to disconnect the front-facing camera like I did here. And if you do, what you might find is that it's going to fall out of the frame later on anyway. So if you leave that one attached, you should be able to remove the front-facing camera with the logic board at the same time. Doesn't really matter which way you do it. Just make sure that you keep track. You don't want to have to go back and look for your camera again. But you can see the logic board does come out pretty easily. Unfortunately, on this model, they've put the charging port directly onto the logic board, so it's not modular. Down here, you're going to have some metallic tape that we're going to peel back, and this is going to be covering some of the components on the flex cable from the display assembly. So I would just take your time, apply some heat if necessary, and try to keep this all in one piece. I'm just going to set it over here to the side for the moment, and we'll try to make sure that it doesn't get torn or lose any of its adhesive property. And I've got a good LCD on this, so what I'm gonna do is remove the screen and hopefully preserve the LCD. So you'll see I'm kind of taking my time here on these cables. If you're not worried about your old screen, you can literally just yank them out. But what I'm gonna do is take this out and see if we can't later on maybe separate the glass from the LCD. But for the moment, if you're gonna do the same thing, if you wanna try to preserve this existing display, just take your time and use a lot of heat and a lot of patience, and you should be able to get these cables pried away from the housing. You'll notice here shortly that I went ahead and removed the headset jack because it does kind of cover up the cable a little bit on one side, and fortunately that is a modular component, so if we ever need to, we can go back and replace that really easy. And what I like to do sometimes is take a blade just enough to get under the corner, so that using that in combination with the heat gun, we can get a proper pry tool underneath the cable. So I'll go ahead and speed this up here in just a second and spare you the boredom of watching me struggle with this, but I did want to give you a realistic idea of just the fact that it is a little bit challenging to get this cable out. You'll have to take your time for sure. And I was taking a look at the cable here and just noticed that it looks like the headset jack kind of covers it up a little bit. So if you take anything pretty much you can stick inside and just very gently pull it apart. There's a little bit of adhesive behind it, but pretty easy to get this headset jack away from the housing. And once we've freed all these cables as well, we can go ahead and proceed with removing the existing display. Now this one has a few cracks in it, so what I did is I went ahead and taped it off with some strapping tape. This will help keep it in one piece and hopefully keep your desk a little neater. Most of the adhesive is going to be at the top and the bottom of this screen. There's not too much around the edges here because there's just a very thin layer of glass, but there's no adhesive behind the LCD itself. So we're going to concentrate just on the upper and lower portions of the screen. And again, because I'm going to try to preserve the LCD, I'll do it very slowly. You can skip ahead if you like. The main thing is we're going to pry underneath here, and it's not too tough. It's really amazing at the small amount of adhesive that holds this screen in place. You'd kind of think there would be more, but not too much. So I'll start up here at the top with a dulled razor blade. This does not have a sharp edge. I do not want to cut into the bezel of the phone. I just want to lift it up enough so that we can get a pry tool underneath there and then just kind of work around the perimeter. And the mesh from the earpiece is actually going to come out with the display, so don't try to separate the two while they're in the phone. You can actually go directly underneath that mesh piece, apply a little more heat, and you'll see when I go across the top, we want to get underneath that entire painted stripe. When you go down the side of the phone, you do not need to go in very deep. It's literally maybe a millimeter or two around the edge, so don't push too hard. Again, if you're trying to preserve the LCD, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on it. You can see I'm just going under the edge, tiny bit. And you can see there my front-facing camera actually fell out. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start lifting it from the top end. There will still be a little bit of glue at the bottom, but if you just work around a little bit, it doesn't take too much. Now that we have the leverage of the entire glass kind of working for us, we'll just apply a little more heat down here at the bottom, and this thing should open up nicely. And once we've got the glass separated from the frame, we can go ahead and work the cables out from the back side. Make sure nothing gets snagged in the process. And the next thing we're going to want to do is remove all of this old glass and adhesive from the mid frame. So take your time and make sure you have a nice clean surface to work with. You don't want any old adhesive or any shards of glass left behind that can cause you some problems later on. Once you've got everything removed, we're going to just lay out some new adhesive here. I've got some 3M I'm going to cut to size for the top and the bottom edges. And I've got this nice roll of super thin double-sided adhesive tape. Again, all the parts and tools are going to be linked in the bottom. This stuff right here is great. It actually fits down the sides, and it's really difficult to cut adhesive that thin. So the fact that this stuff comes on a roll makes it very convenient, and it will save you a lot of time. So I would recommend, if you're in the business, definitely invest in this. It's now that it's available. If not, you may not need a whole roll. You can always take a pair of scissors or a razor blade and kind of cut a sheet of adhesive to fit. But having this stuff on a roll will definitely make your life easier. So what we want to do is kind of just match the width of the painted area of the phone, and as usual, be sure that you do not cover up your front-facing camera or your proximity sensor or earpiece. Otherwise, you're going to have to take the phone apart again, and nobody wants to do that. I want to point out here that there's a small piece of tape on the original display, and we're going to transfer that over. This is a Kapton tape, and I always recommend you take a very close inspection of what you're working with. Any of this kind of blue tape that you see, and it may be a different color, you want to make sure that your replacement part comes with that. If not, you can have shorting problems. This is here for a reason. It's to prevent these metal contacts from grounding out. So make sure that you address that before you prepare for installation. Next step, what we're going to do after we've got our adhesive laid down is go ahead and remove the wax paper side so that we'll have a sticky surface. So I'm not going to show this entire process. You'll get the idea. Sometimes you'll need a razor blade. Other times you can actually take one of these very thin pry tools, and that'll allow you to get underneath. So again, just make sure you're leaving behind the sticky stuff on the frame. All right, so we have our surface prepared, and we can get ready to put the new screen on. One last thing here, and that's going to be the earpiece mesh, and this is a very common mistake that is relatively easy to make. So make it a point to remove this earpiece mesh and transfer it over to the screen. If you put the screen on and you've got to take it off again, there's always a possibility of damaging it. So do make sure, if you want to make a checklist, but whatever it takes, home buttons, earpiece mesh, bad things to leave out. And this one actually had a little piece of tape that went over the top, although there's no adhesive underneath it, so I'm not sure what that was for. I assume just to protect the paint. If you've got any kind of that kind of tape on your display, make sure you remove that as well before you install it. And then we'll just go ahead and feed the flex cables through the frame. Very slowly and carefully. Don't want to damage this one. And of course, make sure everything is lining up before you push down on it, because once it sticks, it's just kind of a headache. And if you do remove it, chances are you'll have to reapply the adhesive, so that will slow you down. And we have a nice flush fit all the way around. So now we can go ahead and proceed with putting, well, my front-facing camera first, if you haven't already done that. This will either need to go in, or you can attach it to the logic board and install the two at the same time, whatever works easiest for you. And we're going to make sure that there's nothing missing on the inside. If there are any rubber boots at the top for the proximity sensor or the microphone or anything else, make sure that those did not fall out. And then down here you can see that little piece of tape that I moved out of the way is actually underneath the cables. So I'm going to have to peel that back one more time. And once we've got the cables laying down against the frame, we can just go ahead and put that over the top. And make sure that's going over both of those cables, not just the one. And remember, we do need to put our headset jack back into position. You want to make sure that all of your flex cables are moved out of the way. Of course, we don't want to pinch those underneath the logic board. But from here, we can just set the board into place. You'll notice something consistent about LGs. Even when you put this logic board into the proper position, it always kind of feels like it's flopping around a little bit, especially at the bottom. I don't know why that is. But until you get the screws into the rear panel, it's always going to feel a little bit spongy on the bottom. We want to make sure that there's not anything trapped underneath the logic board, of course, and when you're sure that you've got these cables on the outside, you should be safe. Don't be surprised if it feels a little bit funny at the bottom. They tend to do that with this particular manufacturer. I'm not sure why. And then we'll go ahead and plug in both of our cameras at the top. Another interesting thing about this phone, no antenna wires connected to the logic board. So that's this is one of the few phones that I've seen like that, and presumably all the antenna components are built into the rear panel. That would be my assumption. So we'll go ahead and put the, you can put the top or the bottom panel on first. It doesn't matter too much, but the bottom panel actually kind of feeds in underneath those two pieces that come down the side, those side rails, which if you take a look at them, it's pretty easy to see how it works. So you can actually put the bottom half in first if you want. I put the top. It doesn't really matter too much. It's pretty easy to work with either way. But again, make sure those go underneath those two little tabs at the bottom, and everything kind of snaps into place for the most part on this phone. But again, you'll want to go ahead and put at least enough screws in here to hold it in place. And usually before I put all the screws in, I'll go ahead and pop the SIM card and battery in and make sure everything's working properly. And then we've got our G3 looking almost like new again. Alright, so go ahead and put the rest of the screws in. Put the battery panel on the back, and for any of you who are wondering, earlier I did test the display that I removed and the LCD is still good. I will let you know as soon as I find out whether or not it is possible to remove that from the glass, so stay tuned. If you found the video helpful, please hit the like button, feel free to subscribe or share it on the social media platform of your choice, and check us out on the web at gocellphonerepair.com. Thanks for watching.